If you want to start that, Heather. Okay, good morning, everybody. Great to see you all. Welcome to the August edition of the Arts and Creative Community Committee, or the AC3. We met last in June. It's great to see you all. Hopefully a few more folks will trickle in here. I wanted to mention and welcome Lisa as our ASL interpreter. Thank you for joining us, Lisa. And we are recording our session today, as we always do, and we'll post it on the YouTube playlist for the AC3 so that anybody that's not able to attend or wants to review our conversation can go back and look at that. We have a pretty straightforward, simple agenda today. That doesn't mean that's necessarily going to be quick, but it's simple and straightforward. As we mentioned at the last meeting, we want to talk with all of you about, or further the conversation, I should say, about planning for next year's budget for the arts funds that are being made available. We're starting to get some indications of about how much money we might have next year. It's not carved in stone yet, but we have some indications. We have some ideas, and we want to work towards making some final decisions by or at least about certain aspects of this by our next meeting in October. So today will really be about continuing that conversation and talking about both, if you'll recall, the first primary decision that we always need to make year to year is what do we believe the split between operating funds and capital funds should be. And as you'll recall, capital funds are meant for permanent physical installations of public art. And those funds roll over year to year if we don't use them. So, and then operating funds are any other forms of public art, arts education, or performing arts, certain forms of temporary art, and those funds do not roll over year to year. So any funds that we decide to use for that need to be spent within the fiscal year that will start next June. So we want to talk about that sort of split between operating and capital, and we also want to talk about just kind of brainstorming some ideas of different themes, different ways that we could spend the money. Heather and I and others from the city here have some ideas that have been tossed around, but we want to hear from you. So that's kind of the main thing that we're going to talk about today, and Heather's going to kind of lead us through that. Before I jump into that, welcome Antonietta, good to see you. And we have Lisa here to be your interpreter. Heather, anything else that I missed to sort of open things up or set the stage here?
I don't think so. I think you covered it.
Okay, cool. All right, well then with that, I can pass it over to you.
Excellent. So we got our preliminary projection from budget folks on the estimated percent for the arts funding for fiscal year 24-25. And it's the largest to date. It's $297,000, which is exciting. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Sounds good, Thomas. Okay, so I'm going to share a screen and I will spotlight Lisa. Okay. So we wanted to, as a kind of framing the conversation, we want to review previous fiscal years. I'm going to try to zoom out and hopefully, that's not good. I'm just going to keep zoomed in and we'll go down the table. So for fiscal year 21-22, this is all review. 200,000 went to the first round of capital art, which you'll remember is the Mosaic project being managed by Rock Arts United and the Murals project being managed by ARIA Strategies and Blackout Consulting. There's 36,000 set aside for the Arts and Culture Plan. And that was it for that first year for a total of 236. Fiscal year 22-23, there was 200,000 for a second round of capital art and 36 for maintenance. a maintenance set aside. And the 200,000 was what we discussed at our last meeting to kind of come to the conclusion through an email survey then that the framing and theme around that 200,000 will be a scaled down version of the Centering Youth project. And then fiscal year 23-24, which was the first year we could do non-capital art. We had 89,000 for the arts and culture plan, which brings our total for the arts and culture plan to 125,000. As a reminder, we have 25,000 from the county committed to that, as well as a grant through Community Foundation for 20,000 and a grant through Farish Foundation for 30,000, bringing that project total to 200,000. We released that RFP last month, so that's exciting. And the deadline for proposals is September 12th for that. Additionally, from 23-24, there was, we made the decision through the survey to set aside $32,000 because the general idea was that we should really aim for 10% of the total funds being set aside for percent for the arts, and which left 50,000 then to also go for the second round capital art. So that brings us to the topic for today, fiscal year 24-25. Again, we have 297,000 projected for that year. And the first thing that I think is probably the easiest for us to talk about is the maintenance set aside. So if we're really aiming to do 10% of total funds for maintenance, if we set aside 36,000 from this fiscal year, 24-25, then that would bring our total to $104,000, which is 10% of the total percent for the arts budget allocations. So that's the first thing we want to get feedback from you all. And I want to give another thank you to Annette Humanis Gleason for doing that research on what other folks are doing as in terms of maintenance set aside. So how do you all feel about that? It's 36,000. Is that a good thing to aim for, to have that be the 10% total budget for maintenance set aside?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, cool. So that was a straightforward, the first easy question. So that leaves then 261,000 for art. So the biggest question is, what is the split that we want to do between capital art and non-capital art? We've heard loud and clear from folks that Arts Bloom, there's a big demand for it. So we expect that we're going to do another round of Arts Bloom from this funding, but we want to talk to you all about what that split should look like. In other words, how much should we put towards capital art versus Arts Bloom, non-capital art? Thoughts?
So this is Thomas speaking. I think that the capital art, in a way, is going to require more money than Arts Bloom. I mean, as a person who's probably more invested in Arts Bloom, I probably shouldn't be saying that, but I think in reality, though, that arts, the capital, stuff it's going to require more funding. So I think it's going to have to be not quite an even split and probably less to Arts Bloom. That's just my take on things, just from a practical sense. So.
Regarding Arts Bloom, this is in that it says 6 proposals awarded. How many applications proposals did you receive?
56.
Whoa, okay.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
And that was definitely part of us hearing that there's a big need for it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the kind of side topics that we maybe wanted to bounce off of you all today too was, because of that need, in the next round, we're expecting that we would include some kind of restriction to maximize opportunities for folks. Potentially something like awardees, people can only receive this award once every 2, 3, or 4 years. To really, again, maximize opportunities for different groups and individuals. But we wanted to brainstorm that with you as well. I'm maybe sending us down a rabbit hole, so I apologize for doing that. We can parking lot that and get back to the idea of the split between capital and non-capital art. But yeah.
Heather, out of curiosity, out of those 53 or 56 applicants, was there like a total amount that, from a request standpoint that totaled?
Oh, I have that somewhere. Let me look at that. It's a great question. Let me pull that up. Hang on.
I guess my initial thought would be to just do another 100,000 as a suggestion and then leave the rest for the capital side.
Yeah, thanks, Orlando. And while Heather's looking that up, I'll just mention too, and I appreciate what Thomas said, because I think that is pretty accurate, that generally speaking, capital projects, permanent physical installations, are going to be more expensive than the ones that we do through performing arts or arts education and that sort of thing. And I guess I just want to mention that part of this committee's task to sort of figuring out what the split should be each year, a couple of things we want to keep in mind every time we're having that conversation. One, the split between capital and operating or non-capital should never be viewed as which one do we value more necessarily, because they aren't apples to apples, because of the point that Thomas made, that the capital tends to be more expensive. So if we give more to one or the other, that's not meant to be a message that we value one more than the other. So I don't want to conflate that. And two, when we're going to make decisions like this every year. So whatever decision we make this year doesn't have to be how we do things moving forward. We probably want to get into some sort of seasons, right? Where one year we're more focused on this, or one year we're more focused on that, but there'll always be some sort of a balance. There might be some years where it's more heavy on one than the other, so whatever we decide doesn't have to sort of set the tone for how we do it every year after that. There's flexibility year to year. So we're just going to mention that as we make those decisions.
So the total of the requests of all 56 proposals was $645,000. And I have
honestly, I would have thought it'd be more than like $1 million with 56, or 53 organizations. So I guess it's less than I thought.
I'd like to share, we're working on a document that gives an overview of the Arts Bloom RFP process and includes this information, but I think I'd like to share with you. This is some stats from the different art proposal types, just to give you an idea. So we were looking at, for instance, the amount of the funding requests. So most proposals were $10,000 or $20,000 requests, because if you remember, people could request $5,000, $10,000 or $20,000. It was a pretty even split between arts education and performing arts for art type, which is interesting. The funding request by art type, people were more likely to request $20,000 as opposed to $10,000 for art education, whereas opposed for performing arts, they were more likely to request $10,000, which is interesting. Most of the applicants were groups as opposed to individuals. And roughly a third of the proposals included some kind of focus on youth. So again, we're going to include that. Sorry, was there a question?
I just have one more comment, but go ahead and finish your thought.
Yeah, that we're going to include that in our overview document, but that's maybe a helpful thing, because we want to look at that and keep that stuff in mind as we're designing future rounds, right? All of those things.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Heather. And remind me, didn't we also conclude that among the 56 or so applicants, there was a certain number that were not really meeting the requirements or not really eligible for reasons X, Y, or Z? So the actual number of eligible or qualified complete applications was lower. I don't know off the top of my head what that number was.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know off the top of my head either what that number is.
But there wasn't a small number of applicants that it really didn't meet the requirements. I mean, like, for example, we had an artist from California that is just obviously just sweeping the web looking for funding opportunities and suggested something that obviously, they're not even local, so that's a problem, but they didn't address the Arts Bloom goals at all. They didn't really have a complete proposal. I'm sure they're a great artist and they're very creative, but it didn't make any sense for this program. So that's an extreme example, but there was a number of things that just wouldn't fit. So just keep that in mind.
So I think,
Oh, sorry. Just had a question on the centering youth theme. Is that what we're trying to decide on the split, or is that for prior year?
that's for prior year.
Okay.
We're kind of thinking of fiscal year 24-25 funding and starting with the split. That could be an idea, as we're brainstorming ideas for potential themes for the funding, that could be something we look at. But
Right.
we wanted to tackle the split first and then brainstorm topics with you all.
Well, I just think it might help to consider a theme, because then that gives you a better sense of where the pool of funding might have more impact.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
If you're going to go with keeping themes starting with centering youth moving forward. So that's also a consideration.
Well, that's helpful to think too about. One idea I heard was another $100,000 round for Arts Bloom, which would leave 161 for a third round of capital art. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the centering youth theme for Arts Bloom could be a thing, right? Because I think right now that the 250 from previous years that we have that we're looking at centering youth is capital art. And we know that there are a lot of groups that work with youth that applied for Arts Bloom first round. So maybe we do have a focus on youth for the next round of Arts Bloom. That's a potential theme for sure. What do folks think about that?
I was gonna just adjust what I said the first time,
Please.
because after seeing that there were 50 some applicants, maybe we should be doing, that fiscal year should be less capital art, actually, even though it costs more, but maybe we just do less of that, because I think it looks to me, just looking at those numbers, that if we want to also be thinking about this fund as cultivating and nurturing the future of art and artists and art organizations, which I think we kind of want to do, I feel like we really need to be pursuing the non-capital art in a more robust way, in terms of funding. So I'm actually leaning a little bit more towards now giving more money to the Arts Bloom side of things, and just lessening what we can offer for that fiscal year for the capital art program. I mean, that's my take now that I see those numbers, that we're really, there's an opportunity here that we don't want to miss in terms of cultivating the future, so.
I think that's an excellent point. And I think maybe if we were going to do more than 100, then we could actually have the option for a larger funding amount as well. How does that sound to you all? I think, of course, we work in the logistics, so we can't help but think about the number of contracts that we're managing, right? And the next year, we're really getting stuff off the ground, so we're juggling a lot, but we're also going to be managing the arts and culture plan work. So we're cognizant of not wanting to have, say, add another 15 contracts that we're managing. But I do think that there's an opportunity there to maybe have one or two larger awards if we're doing a larger, more than 100,000, right? So it would be helpful to hear from you all what you think in terms of what would be a good kind of maximum grant request amount for Arts Bloom. As a reminder, we had it was $5,000, $10,000, and $20,000 requests last time, and we could still have those included, so people could still potentially request those, but maybe we have a larger amount as well. Any thoughts on that?
I actually think those numbers are pretty good. In terms of, you know, non-capital art, I hear what you're saying, and I'm just wondering if by the time we get to 24, 25? Yeah, 24, 25, that maybe we have more assistance in this area. Like, you know, I'm thinking that actually we do, I mean, sorry to say this, but I think we actually do want to encourage more, more people creating art. So I don't know. I think that we need to also pursue on another end here, maybe, that there needs to be an office that is just designed in the city for this, you know, just something I've been saying for a while. But, you know, as we see the need and the desire and all of that, I just feel like that is data that then proves why we need to have an office for culture and arts. And so I don't know, I feel like, yeah, maybe by 24, 25, we can have an office. And so there's staff to actually, I don't know, I'm dreaming, I guess, but.
It's good to dream. Well, what do you
Hey,
think?
Heather,
Oh, yeah.
I was just gonna say that maybe another way of doing it is if you do, let's say, like a $50,000 one or something like that, is 150, maybe some 20s, and, you know, maybe put an amount of applicants that will get a certain amount, and that way you could kind of know you're only gonna get five $20,000 ones, or, you know, I don't know, $10,000 ones. That way, if I'm applying, let's say, for whatever reason, I'm applying for a 50 when I'm like, well, there's only going to be one. Do I really want to go for that one, or do I want to go for the 20 when there's maybe five? And, you know, maybe the chances are a little bit better for me to get 20 versus the 150. That way it kind of puts a little different pressure on the organizations to either step up their game to put the best foot forth for that 50, or 20 or 10 or 5 or whatever the case is.
Thank you, Orlando. I think that that's a helpful way too to think about how to break up review of the projects, because we expected a big turnout, but I don't think we expected 56 proposals. So thinking about ways to kind of creatively be able to break up and potentially have then a couple different review panels, so we're not asking folks to review quite so many proposals, I think could be a helpful thing too. So I think maybe a question to further tease this out is, if we were to do more for Arts Bloom than for capital, if we did a capital at all, what's kind of the minimum amount we would want for capital, right? Because capital projects do tend to be costly. So what is we don't want to decrease the capital amount so much that we don't actually feasibly have a significant capital project, unless we want to actually not have capital at all that year. So, but can we talk about like what, and city staff, feel free to chime in here too. What would be kind of a minimum amount for one substantial capital art project?
Well, what was the minimum amount awarded thus far?
Through Percent for the Arts?
Yeah.
So I think the mural projects, we're doing 4 for 80,000. So that works out to about 20,000 plus admin fees. So about 25,000. Sabrina, you probably work more in large capital art projects, so you might have a larger range than that, right?
I actually don't really deal with capital art all that much, but based on what Ellen has said, it's usually larger than that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think other than murals, I think if you're talking about any kind of sculptural artwork, it's going to be, you know, pretty substantially more than 10 or 20,000. I'm trying, I don't know what the minimum we've ever had was, but I would say, you know, at least 50, probably more.
Heather, maybe for the capital art, maybe instead of doing murals and the sculpture in every single year, what if one year we focus on doing a larger sculpture? Maybe the next year we do a larger mural or several smaller murals or something, but maybe not touching everything every single year. And then we could put more money into the arts bloom to encourage more artists, which will eventually lead to a bigger art community, which could lead to larger projects in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. I want to bounce the idea off folks too of just potentially not doing capital art for out of this year's funding, right? How do people feel about that? It's not like we wouldn't have capital art going on, right? Because we have our first round right now and we're going to go into a second round of capital art. It's just that potentially, what if we didn't have capital art through fiscal year 24-25 funding? How do folks feel about that?
Do we have any idea what capital art is happening in the city in the next year from other funding sources than 1%? And that whether we could kind of weigh that if there's a lot of other stuff going on, that maybe the performing arts is where or temporary arts is where we could put our emphasis?
I mean, I think outside of percent for the through percent for the arts, we're going to have 4 murals happening, ideally this year, and then next year a mosaic project. Sometime within the next couple of years, we're looking at that 250 for centering youth. It looks like we're going to have, right, potentially 3 murals and the idea of the art park, right? So outside of that, I think there's the Sister Cities Bridge art project, which I don't think the RFP has gone out for that yet, right, Sabrina? We're still the RFP. Ellen's working on the RFP. I think it hasn't been released yet, but that's a big project. That's probably the biggest upcoming capital art project.
Yeah, but I think there's a difference between what we're doing internally and what's going on and figuring it out versus what the public sees us doing. And I feel like the Sister Cities art, the bridge or whatever, is going to take a while before the public sees us doing anything. So it's going to look like we're not doing anything.
Yeah, so those are the main ones. There's also, I believe a few meetings ago, we introduced you all, if you happen to be at that meeting, to the idea of an upcoming project. We're going to talk about this later in the meeting, but I'll just mention it here now about celebrating the 50th birthday of the Flower City logo. Right here in my picture. Was created in 1975, and 2025 is its 50th birthday. So Barbara and her team in communications and special events are hatching a bunch of ideas about how we can celebrate that logo in the calendar year 2025, which overlaps with fiscal year 24-25. And some of that it will likely be permanent physical installation, so capital art. So there is the possibility of that, and other aspects of that celebration would be not necessarily capital art. So they're still working out some ideas around that. So I guess as long as we're mentioning that, Barbara, do you want to take a couple of minutes to say anything more beyond that I haven't mentioned?
No, just I guess I could just put a finer point on it and say that this is something that we recognize because we're coming up on the 50th. There are a couple of things that are in our plans that may be arts related, but the one that is most important for this group to know about is the fact that we want to we're thinking of exploring putting out an RFP for a piece of capital art to celebrate quite specifically the city mark. We've decided with Kevin's help and guidance to make that a separate initiative and pursue those funds through our capital planning. That's my hope, that we don't have to leverage any percent for the arts funds for that. Given that it's once in a lifetime, I think I've talked to our budget director, I think he's inclined to agree that it's an opportunity for us to pursue additional dollars for the arts. So that's the plan as it stands right now. The only other thing I was going to add later in the conversation was going to be, given that 2025 is the year that is the 50th anniversary of the mark, it would be neat if this group wanted to keep that in mind as you're planning whatever arts you're planning for that year. It might just be a theme or something that you might choose to support as well. But again, that's for this group to have that discussion and make that decision.
Thanks, Barbara. And when she mentions pursuing that through capital funds, she's not talking about what we're talking about today in our capital operating split. It's more broadly the city's capital improvement.
There's
plan.
A place I've got to go and sit and argue that versus facilities and that versus other things. So, yeah. But in the scheme of our capital improvement projects across the city, this I hope should be again, once in a 50-year moment. So
yeah, so they're not necessarily looking to pursue funds through percent for the arts, but as she said, there's an opportunity for us to consider that theme that particular year in terms of what we create. And there might also be opportunities just more generally for this committee to help out with other ideas of how we can celebrate the mark and the logo, and maybe even help us with connections for other artists that we try to engage, because it's not going to be a single thing. It's going to be multiple things to celebrate it.
And the other thing I just want to say is that my hope would be that we kind of have a built-in audience here, or a built-in group of experts here that I might love to leverage, but like involve you in, even if we're using funds that aren't percent for the arts funds, I still would love to engage this group in helping us vet the art that's coming in and help us go through the RFP process with us, because I'm going to need experts to help with that. You may or may not want to, but I just wanted to throw that out as well. Since this is our AC3, it'd be great to engage you in that process as well.
I have two thoughts. One,
Sorry.
Sorry.
Antonietta has had her hand up for a moment, if that's okay,
sorry.
Thomas.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. First of all, I want to extend a gratitude to you guys thinking of us, us experts of ideas how we can celebrate the 2025. If I can just throw in having some, performing arts to like an event, and having any of us that have performing artists from different diversity of the communities, celebrating the culture and things like that. So it's just an idea to throw out there with like an event, maybe be over the course of the month to celebrate the 2025, the 50 years of that.
Thank you, Antonietta. Okay, Thomas.
Thank you, Antoni. Oh, sorry, I forgot we have an interpreter. Yes, thank you, Antonietta. I think you bring up a interesting thing. I hadn't thought of it before you said this, but one theme might be something along the lines of Rochester diversity, or diverse Rochester, or something like that.
Yes.
As a celebration itself, But I was going to say earlier, the idea that I think we shouldn't do the capital art. I think that, in a way, people are kind of only knowing about this year, and so to then have the next year where we don't kind of do it, I think just from a optics and marketing kind of thing about, or branding for this group, I think that may not be a good idea. Maybe somewhere down the road, we could maybe not do one of the other of those, either not do Arts Bloom or not do capital arts. at 1 year or whatever. But I think in the beginning, we need to kind of build some kind of, well, for lack of a better word, branding about what this group is doing and what this percent for the arts fund is all about. And so I think we still need a couple of years to get that into the public understanding. So I would kind of caution us about not about changing too much of how we do right now, so that we can kind of set some kind of process, and then understand, oh, this is what that is, you know. So, but I still feel like we should be giving more to Arts Bloom in the 24-25, and maybe just do less capital arts things, you know. Maybe, you know, yeah, sculptures are going to run, you know. I think I don't know on university that was less than $60,000. And that even seems small. It was that small, but anyway, that was, you know, 20 years ago almost.
Thank you, Thomas. I think that's good. I think we're at a good level of detail with the split for now. And I think the next meeting we can kind of really fine tune exactly what that means. I think it's maybe good for us to know now we want to give, you know, more than 100,000 to Arts Bloom, and the capital side that it might look like a 200,000 versus a 61,000 split, or it might be like a 150 split to a, you know, we can kind of fine tune that. But maybe it's a good moment to go back to the idea of the different themes that we could have, or not having a theme at all, right? So just to kind of recap, we've talked about the centering youth theme, or the city logo anniversary theme, or a theme around Rochester diversity or celebration of Rochester diversity. Those are some of the ideas that have come up. We do want to mention, Kevin, do you want to talk about the other communications led initiative, and then Ray can chime in too if she would like.
Sure. Yeah. So Ray and Barbara and their team in communications have come up with this pretty cool idea called How We Rock. And you may all be familiar with the space in City Hall that's called the Link Gallery. It's a long hallway that connects two sections of the building, and we use it as an art gallery, and it's a rotating art gallery. So we're always looking for new ideas of what to fill that space with. It's typically two-dimensional pieces, but occasionally some other three-dimensional pieces. But in any case, they had this neat idea of celebrating our festival scene and our event scene in Rochester by finding local Rochester photographers, whether they be established or up and coming, to basically have them do some photography at our events throughout the upcoming warm weather season, and then display those photographs in the Link Gallery. So they're looking at doing a sort of an RFP. I don't know, Ray, would it be an RFP process or a call or some sort of a review process for people to submit to be those photographers? Is that right?
Yeah, we were looking at doing an RFP process for next August. So the goal is to have the exhibit up next August. Should I just go? Okay, cool. So the goal is to basically show off what Rochester has during the summer seasons, through the perspective of local Rochesterians who are amazing at capturing these moments. So like from a comms perspective here at the city, we have to tell our story from a city perspective. So all of our event photos are told from, this is what Rochester has, but the perspective is going to be completely different. And the way that photographers use editing and effects to recreate moments is insane. So we want to give them full access to all city events. So they basically get a media pass, and they'd have a year's worth of access to go to every event that is city sponsored. They would take photos, and they would have the artistic freedom to create an exhibit that would go up in the Link Gallery for the entire month. And we were looking at giving them also so they can sell their stuff not in City Hall, but if they have art, they can put up, they'll have the opportunity to sell their pieces, and they would also be able to boost or show off their merchandise at events that they take photos at. So those are some of the ideas that we had for the project or program.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. So we're essentially putting together a compensation package for the photographers that get selected. And Ray, it's probably about a half dozen is the target. Is that right? In
Total,
terms of- half dozen photographers. So they're full access pass is part of the compensation package, and the other things that she mentioned. And then on top of that, we'd be looking at giving them some sort of a stipend.
Yes.
So with that many artists, it's not that many. If we were to give them a nice stipend, it really wouldn't be very much money out of our larger percent for the arts bucket of money. So it's a kind of thing where we could do something really cool that doesn't isn't on the scale of like a large sculpture or something like that. So that's an idea that we would like to put before the team for consideration among many other ideas.
May I add something?
Sure.
I love this idea, but may I recommend giving the majority opportunity to the BIPOC or disability community photographers first, if possible.
Yeah, thanks, Antonietta. We certainly have that as a goal, and just about everything that we do, and this wouldn't be any different.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Ray's working on that with the communications team. It's still kind of early on. Thank you, Ray, for talking about it. Any other questions about that, or any other ideas for potential themes for either Arts Bloom or Capital Side Art?
Well, Heather, you mentioned the possibility of tying Arts Bloom to the theme of centering for youth. And the one thing I noticed when you showed some of those figures was that there was a fairly small percentage of the Arts Bloom projects that were centered on youth. They would think it was only 30%, which is kind of disappointing, because I think it's really important that we focus on youth now. And so I think that whole centering youth theme, which we had hoped to be, $1 million, is obviously a much smaller pot now. And I just think we should put whatever we can into that. And what we have now is capital art. And it seems to me that performance art and arts education are such an important component of what we had originally thought of as centering youth. And so I'm wonder if what everyone thinks about making that the theme.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was a way to connect the two, like, Rochester celebrating our youth, Rochester Proud, like putting it together with the celebration of the logo, but with a focus on youth and how they're making Rochester proud. So that was my thought. And I agree. I still think we should focus on youth, since we're only using focus right now for the capital side.
I love that we're talking about this because my daughter is a student of SODA, the School of the Arts in the city, and I'm part of the SODA Parents Committee, and I'm happy to be a collaborator between the city and the school, because she does these projects throughout the year, and the kids, like, they're amazing. So let me know if that's something that I can be a contributor or whatnot.
Thank you, Antonietta. That's awesome. Okay. Well, if there's no other ideas for themes, maybe we can wrap up. I think we got a lot of really good information today. And as a reminder, our October meeting is the meeting that we're really hoping to close with really final decisions. Our budget folks really like to know by October, but there's a few months that can be at the latest, but we really try to have, in terms of an annual budget planning process, have the decisions made by October. So we look forward to speaking with you a little more specifically, kind of honing in on these same things. So that will be our agenda for our October meeting. We're also hoping to talk to you at that meeting about the membership process for AC3. We know we've brought that up in the past, and it was on our agenda for our last meeting, but we had such a robust conversation before getting to that. And then we also had lunch. So we didn't really get to the membership process, but hopefully we can get to that next time. As a reminder, hopefully within a year or two, we'll be moving towards a formalized arts commission. So we definitely don't want to put so much time and energy into a membership process that for something that is going to be transitioned to a formalized process already. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Kevin, or anyone else? Kind of last thoughts for today's discussion?
Not on the discussion, but before we left, I just want to give a shout out to Christina at the Yards, because she and her team just successfully put on a teen ambassador program, and I was fortunate enough for my daughter to participate, who's also a SOTA student, and a few other SOTA students participated. But it's basically a week-long arts camp, and they dabbled in lots of different forms of art for the week, and culminated with a First Friday gallery showing of what the kids have put together, and it was really awesome. And my daughter just loved it. She was really reluctant to go in not because she doesn't love the arts, but because she didn't want to get out of bed.
Same.
Yeah, you're there, right? So it was a challenge, but
Don't mind me asking.
what's that?
How old is your daughter, if you don't mind me asking?
No, that's fine. She's 14. She'll be a freshman, and then I also have
Oh
a
my
junior.
God, me too.
A
Oh my
junior.
God.
Okay, so maybe they know each other.
And in the same exact age, small freaking world. Maybe
That's awesome.
those two can set something up.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so
Thank you.
I
Thank
just
you,
think
Kevin.
Sure thing. Yeah, the program went really well, and they're really happy. So congrats.
Yeah, it was truly a delight, and I'm absolutely in agreement. I think the theme of centering youth and the program we just had is absolutely just in line with the work we want to be doing. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else have any parting thoughts before we wrap it up?
Thank you, everyone. Have a good lunch and a good rest of the day.
And make sure you go see Thomas and the Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
Can't wait.
I'm going to be there,
Yes,
Thomas.
yes.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.